Welcome to the Rogue Reader podcast. My name is James, and I love reading Star Wars books.
Hi, I'm Robert, and I've never read a Star Wars book before.
And I'm Johnny. I've never read a Star Wars either.
And that's the point of this podcast. For years, these guys have been coming to me with Star Wars questions, and it made me realize that I want to share my knowledge and love for these books with others, especially those that like Star Wars but may not like reading. To that end, each episode of the series will cover a different Star Wars book that I will break down with my friends. We will go over the background, the plot, and end with our thoughts on it. Sounds good to you guys?
Yeah.
Perfect. All I need is narration.
I'll be narrating, for sure. For our first episode, I thought it would be fitting to cover the very first Star Wars Expanded Universe novel, Star Wars Splinter of the Mind's Eye, published in 1978, just 1 year after the release of the original movie. For a basic synopsis, the book takes place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. It involves Luke and Leia crashing on a planet and trying to get a mystical artifact known as the Kyber Crystal, which is said to increase Force powers. The author of the book is Alan Dean Foster. He's a pretty well-known science fiction author and well-known for working on novelizations of films. He did the first 3 Alien films, Chronicles of Riddick, Star Trek, Terminator Salvation, Transformers. So known for novelizations. And additionally, he wrote the original novelization for the very original Star Wars movie. And that was based on the 4th draft of the script, and the novel actually came out a year prior to the original film. So Splinter isn't the first Star Wars novel, but it's the first original adventure outside of the movies. Ralph McQuarrie, the concept artist for the film, he also did the cover art. And something that I found interesting is you'll notice that Luke and Leia are looking away from, the camera, I guess you could say. And that's because this book is so early that Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill hadn't yet signed any rights to use their likeness in products. So they had to have them face away.
So theoretically, anyone could have been there.
Yes, theoretically that could be anyone.
And Darth Vader.
And Darth Vader, who's wearing a mask, so that's lucky. This was written to possibly act as the second film in the franchise. So Alan Dean Foster was contracted to write 2 books with this novelization. The second book was to act as a low-budget sequel to the original film. Keep in mind, George Lucas did not have any idea how popular that movie was going to be. But because of it being a low-budget film, it had restrictions on the book. So it had to be set in filmable locations based on budget. So there's a lot of jungles and caverns in this book. They had to avoid visual effects scenes such as space battles. Han Solo could not be in the book because Harrison Ford had not yet signed a contract for the next movie. That's also why Chewbacca's not in this book, because the author felt it wouldn't be right to have Han without Chewbacca. Obviously, Star Wars became a much bigger hit than George Lucas could imagine, so there was no need for a low-budget sequel. So that just kind of makes this a little oddity in time. It should also be noted that this was more Alan Dean Foster's vision for the story. This isn't... George Lucas didn't have a vision that he had this guy write. This was pretty much, he had free reign to kind of do what he wanted to do with this story, as long as he was within those kind of budget constraints if it was a film.
So this wasn't in the plans to make a movie out of or anything like that?
It was in the plans to make a movie, as in George Lucas basically handed the rights to this guy and was like, hey, this needs to be able to be filmable as a movie. But it wasn't like George Lucas had this in his head in advance of what the story would be. The author, in fact, he hadn't seen much of the film when he was writing this. He saw some production reels and Ralph McQuarrie art, and that was about it. This book was finished before the first film even released. Of note, we do have our first mention of the Kyber Crystal, but it functions differently and it's spelled differently than it is in current Disney canon. Kyber crystals are pretty well known now among Star Wars fans as the crystals that power lightsabers, and Rogue One even showed that it was those same crystals that powered the Death Star. But in this novel, the Kyber Crystal is just one singular crystal, and it has the power to amplify Force powers. This seems to be based on earlier drafts of A New Hope, where there was a Force-amplifying gem that was used by Sith Lords. Pre-Disney, there was actually a lot of crystals that could be used in lightsabers. It wasn't until, I believe, an episode of the Clone Wars that it was retconned that all lightsaber crystals are Kyber crystals. And then the very last thing I'll mention before moving on to the plot is that Dark Horse Comics would later make a comic adaptation of this book, which is good for us because that means I pulled a lot of images from that comic, so I can kind of give you guys much more visuals of what's going on in each scene. And for those that may be watching this on YouTube, as we get to those images, I'll just throw them up on the screen. But that's it for the background, so if you guys are ready, we'll just get into what the actual plot is.
Yeah, ready.
All right.
And do it.
So the book opens with Luke and Leia on a mission to meet an underground resistance in the Sarkarpus system. If they can convince them to join the rebellion, a second unnamed system will also join. Luke and R2-D2 are in his X-Wing, and Leia and C-3PO are in a Y-Wing. The book was written before it was established that Luke and Leia are siblings, so we get a lot of romantic tension moments between them in this book.
Perfect. Love it. You got me.
So I definitely pulled my favorites here. This is one little scene in the beginning of the book. Luke is looking at Leia in her X-Wing, and this is what is said. The other, whenever he looked at her, the other caused emotions to boil within him like soup too long on the fire, no matter if she was separated from him by mere vacuum as at present, or only by arm's length in a conference room.
So how old is he, do you think, in this instant right now?
I think they're both about 19. Oh yeah, they're twins, so they're like 19.
Both 19? Oh, okay, checks out.
And then about a page later, we get... even when bothered, to him that voice was as naturally sweet and pleasing as sugar-laden fruit.
It's getting intense. Oh my god.
One of Leia's engines fails, and she has to make an emergency landing on the 5th planet of the system, which is known as Mimban. Luke follows her, but as soon as they hit the atmosphere, a bunch of energy discharges start going off. It's basically like lightning everywhere, and Luke loses sight of Leia and control of his ship, and he crashes. This was originally supposed to be a space battle that caused him to crash, but again, it had to serve as a low-budget sequel, so Alan D. Foster was told he had to remove any like space battle stuff from it because it would be too expensive to film. Which, it's a book. Like, I don't limit the movie, but why would you limit the book?
No, it's true. Yeah, definitely.
You know, if you had to just like read the book and then watch the movie, explain it, and go all out for the book, but when it comes to the movie, then budget. You don't have to go both ways budgeting.
It's like they really wanted this to be as close as possible to a script if they could. Also, the planet they land on, Mimban, is a planet that was brought into Disney canon. In fact, I know you guys have definitely seen it before. Do you know where?
No.
The Old Republic?
No.
Knights of the Republic?
Brought into Disney. So, this is the planet in Solo where Han was conscripted as a stormtrooper and was fighting on that mud planet.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
So that's Mimban. That's the planet.
So eventually Han Solo gets introduced into it.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, sure.
he gets his comeuppance.
Just not Chewbacca, so,
No, Chewbacca was there. That's where they met.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Mimban, as you see on Solo, it's described as a swampy bog planet, lots of fog, sounds of creatures all around. Alan Dean Foster has said that he does not know if George Lucas took anything away from this story for Empire Strikes Back, but it is interesting that Luke crashes his X-Wing on a swamp planet just like he does on Dagobah later in a film. This is the cover of the comic adaptation. I think it does a good job of showing what that planet looks like.
Oh, wow. That was a lot more nice.
So definitely Mark Hamill now.
Definitely Mark Hamill now.
I just like Rambo a little bit, too.
Got it.
Skywalker is Rambo. I like it.
Sylvester Stallone, Luke Skywalker. That's what they cover. Got it.
Luke and Leia, they meet up, and then originally when they were crashing on the planet, they had picked up a landing beacon of some kind on their sensors, so they decide to head towards it, hoping that there's someone there that can provide them passage off the planet. And something that stood out to me here is Leia is talking about how the station could be automated, there might not be anyone there to help them. And Luke agrees, and he says he used to believe in miracles, but he doesn't anymore. And that seems kind of out of character, this boy who just learned about the Force and blew up the Death Star using his feelings, and he doesn't believe in miracles. Like, I don't know, that doesn't seem right, but...
I think miracles are more religious. Well, then again,
the Force
Christianity.
Ancient religions.
Well, wait till Disney gets a hold of them, and then it's going to be...
A little bit later, they make camp, and they're huddled together during the night. They're, actually holding each other. And Leia's asleep, and Luke looks down at her, and this is what the passage reads. Moistly parted in her sleep, her lips seemed to beckon to him. He leaned closer, seeking refuge from the damp green and brown of the swamp and that hypnotic redness. So he leans in to kiss her, but he stops himself at the last minute because Luke's like, well, a farmer could never be with royalty.
And I don't want to get canceled.
And what I think is also hilarious is that the comic adaptation, which was made after the movies and well known that they're siblings, kept this in. And we get a great scene of Luke leering at Leia in her sleep here.
Not just a brother seeing his sister, sleep. Nothing wrong with that. Just don't pull up the
Perfectly normal. Yes.
R2-D2's there to, make sure nothing else goes on.
Watching. When they reach the beacon, they eventually do reach the beacon, and they see that it's an imperial mining operation in town. The Empire is apparently doing energy mining, which that's what the book describes it, and apparently that's why there was so much energy in the atmosphere that caused them to crash. Leia deduces it has to be an illegal and secret operation, and Luke heads into the town to steal some clothes so they can blend in. In order to break in, though, he adjusts his lightsaber so that the beam is really short and thin as a needle, and then that's how he carves his way into the store. And that is here in the comic. And when I read this and then I saw this, my first thought was the cheese grater from Family Guy Star Wars.
It does. It looks so much like a cheese grater.
It's like a lightsaber shiv, light shiv.
And
like that's what Jedi use in prison. Never see it coming.
A shank saber. I know lightsabers, I believe their length can be adjusted, but I've never seen it used like this before, so that's just interesting.
You definitely don't see it in any live action or animated rendition. This is the first time I'm seeing it.
But after stealing the clothes, Luke turns away from Leia so that he can get undressed, but she doesn't start changing. And Luke asks her why, and she basically tells him that she's known him a while and she likes him, but she doesn't trust him to not look at her while undressing.
She was definitely awake.
She puts it, yeah, she puts it all out there. And Luke gets kind of cocky, and he's like, well, if stormtroopers catch us in our rebel flight suits, it won't matter. Go change in a bush. And it's kind of a very episode 2 creepy Anakin Padme style interaction.
It is Anakin's kid.
Yeah.
Oh, both of them are. God.
Yeah.
So if she's going along with it, then that checks out too.
After they change, Luke is looking through how much money he has on him, and he asks Leia how much money she has. And she basically tells him, she goes, what would an alliance representative be doing with currency on a diplomatic mission? So she has no money. So...
Well, good news. He has a spaceship.
Well, like, you're a secret rebel agent going on an underground mission where you could possibly, anything can go wrong, and you don't think to bring money? That seems very stupid of her. Just saying. There's a couple scenes like that in this book where I feel like Leia is not as smart as she should be. Well,
Robert, it's supposed to be a sequel script.
She probably just forgot her wallet at home. What do you want? Cut her some slack.
Luke and Leia are hungry, so they decide to chance going into a cantina to get some food. The attendant in the cantina is staring at them, and he notices that Leia's hands are too clean, so they don't fit the description of a miner. But since Luke was a farmer, his hands fit the part. So the attendant begins to suspect Leia, and he starts talking to an Imperial officer about them. They see this, and Leia gets really nervous, and she starts to get up to leave. And then suddenly, Luke just slaps her across the face, and he yells at her, "You're doing nothing until I finish my meal," basically.
With my dirty, grimy hands, and your clean hands can't do nothing about it.
The officer comes over, and Luke is like, "Oh yeah, Leia, this is my servant. I just bought her recently." And the officer buys the story and leaves them alone.
He is not helping this case not to get canceled.
And luckily, the comic graces us with this scene of Luke just slapping Leia. I love even noticing even this guy in the background is just like, holy shit, man.
Full on open-handed and everything. That smug look at the end too.
Oh, I know, when he's eating his food. This is when we meet our next main character in the book, an old woman named Hala. She sits next to Luke and Leia, and I'll pull up a picture of her. She's basically just an old woman, nothing special. But just so you have a visual of what she looks like.
That is old.
All right.
She tells them that she knows they're outsiders, and she says that she wants their help. She can sense that Luke is strong in the Force, and she basically says that she's a master of the Force, and to prove it, she focuses on this little spice shaker on the table, and with what seems to be really great effort, it starts to shake and it moves just like barely at all.
That's just Luke messing with her.
Well, she's pretending like, see how strong I am, but Luke is pretending to be impressed, but he can tell that she's clearly no master of the Force. But Hala says she'll help them steal a ship and get off the world if they can help her first, and she wants to find the legendary Kyber crystal. Natives of the planet say it's located in the temple of Pomo Gemma, and Hala says she has proof the crystal exists. So she brings out a small box, and it has a little sliver of a red crystal in it. She claims it's the part of the crystal, and she tells Luke to touch it, and when he does, he feels his perception of the Force increases. And according to Luke, he feels that the increase would be based on the size of the crystal. So if someone was able to get the entire crystal, he thinks they could do almost anything with the Force. And that's why Hala wants it. She wants to be able to increase her powers with the Force and believes with Luke's help that they can find it together. So they agree to help her. Just a quick characterization of her. She kind of comes across as this old, like, ranting, like, shambly old woman. Just like a kook kind of character.
Well, it kind of would make sense. You know, he just saw this one kid freaking backhand his freaking servant, supposedly.
And she approves.
And he thinks, oh yeah, I could always scam this kid.
I'm going to show him my crystal.
As the group exits the cantina, Leia kicks Luke in the shin, causing him to fall into some mud as revenge for slapping her, and she says that they're even now. So she offers a hand to Luke, and Luke grabs her hand and then pulls her into the mud, and they get into a mud fight.
Of course.
19, everyone.
As they're having this mud fight in the middle of foreign territory, a group of miners sees them, and this group had seen them in the cantina, and it's clear that they're looking for a fight, and the miners are like, oh, a servant can't fight her master like that. So they jump in and they pull them apart. And they notice that some of Leia's clothing had come a bit undone in the fight. And they start leering at her and they start trying to grab at her.
That's my slave now. Back at all of you.
So Luke slaps them away. And one of the miners decides to pick a fight with him. His name is Jake, by the way. The very Star Wars sounding name, Jake from Star Wars.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Luke.
Well, yeah, good point. Jake pulls out these two blades that are attached to each hand. He has like these gauntlet bladed weapons, and then double blades also come out each of his like boots. So he's got like blades coming out everywhere.
Cool blades, bro. Let me show you mine.
So they get into a bit of a fight, and Luke uses his lightsaber to cut off one of the miners' hands. Very Star Wars. And Leia jumps on one of the guys, starts wrestling him. And then stormtroopers show up and basically arrest all of them for the disturbance, except Hala. She gets away. And all of this just because Luke thought it would be funny to get into a mud fight with his sister while in undercover enemy-occupied territory.
Such a nice guy.
I'm just so glad the stormtroopers let that old lady go away. Yeah. That's where I would draw the line.
I think she distanced herself as soon as she saw the fight break out. I think she wasn't stupid in that regard.
Okay, maybe I'll just keep up with the loony granny look right now.
The group is taken to Captain Supervisor Grammel. I'll show a picture of him here. That's what he looks like. Nothing special there.
Nice mustache.
Yeah.
Mustache.
He interrogates the group, and he determines it was the miners that caused the fight, but he does tell Luke and Leia that he doesn't recognize them. And Luke says that he lost their identification in the fight, but Grammel doesn't believe him. Leia gets a little snippy with him, which is something she tends to do a lot throughout this book. She was a little snippy in the first Star Wars movie, but I feel like the author kind of dialed it up a bit here. And Grammel doesn't take that, so he just starts kicking her. And to get him to stop, Luke just makes up a story that they're escaped criminals from the Sercarpus system. And Grammel's unsure about their story, but he asks Luke about the gemstone that he has on him, that little piece of kyber. And Luke tells him that was he stole that gemstone, that's why they're escaped criminals. Grammel has it confiscated to see if, and decides to see if their criminal story checks out, and he tells them that they're going to be locked up in a maximum security cell with 2 dangerous other criminals. Grammel decides he needs to contact someone higher up about the crystal, so he contacts the Imperial governor named Asada, who seems very interested in the gemstone, but he's more interested in who stole it. And he's shown a video of Luke and Leia, and Asada recognizes Leia, but he doesn't recognize Luke. And so he orders Grammel to keep them secure until the authorities arrive and promises him that there's going to be a promotion in his good work for capturing them. So Grammel is really excited, and the gemstone is seemingly just forgotten in all of this. Luke and Leia are placed in a cell, and in the corner there are these 2 huge aliens that we later find out are called Yuzums. And I have a couple pictures of the Yuzums. Here they are when they meet in the cell.
Oh, they look like Alf.
They look like boars. Jacked.
Almost like Alf and Bothan Spice.
I can see that. Definitely the boars and a jacked Alf. Quickly, when Luke sees them, he starts making these like jabber sounds to one of them. He just like starts like kind of squawking at them. And the Yuzum seem surprised, and then one of them picks up Luke and then just starts planning these big kisses on him. And Leia is surprised, and Luke explains that he recognized their species and used to study other languages on Tatooine for fun, so he knows how to speak their language. And he says that their names are Hin and Ki, and they were indentured servants working in the mine, and they got fed up and basically started a ruckus, which is why they're imprisoned. And I have another big problem with this. So Luke, the nobody from Tatooine, can speak an alien language he never uses, while Leia, one of the leaders of the rebellion, made up of several species, and a senator, cannot speak their language. Something feels really wrong about that. That should be reversed.
You know, it's weird how that now. Why does Luke need 3CPO at that point?
That's another thing. C-3PO and R2-D2, they do nothing in this book. They're just there.
I mean, like, he can speak all these languages, and then freaking, like, just like, we need someone who can speak Bachi. I feel like he could have learned Bachi if he could learn, like, a whole other
something he actually uses, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's basically like, learning Spanish at this point.
And yeah, I mean, he doesn't just know a little. He has full conversations with these characters, Hin and Ki. Also, I feel like these use them, even though they look like boars. I feel like they're very clear replacements for Wookiees. Like I mentioned, Alan Dean Foster didn't want to use Chewbacca because he couldn't use Han, but I feel like he made these aliens kind of similar. So it makes me wonder why not just use other Wookiees?
You can't use Wookiees. They look too much like Chewbacca. Throw in some buff elves in there.
Maybe actually. Also, this is probably just a coincidence, but this also reminded me a bit of Solo when Han meets Chewbacca, and the only reason they don't kill each other is because he can speak Chewie's language.
Yeah, instead of ripping them apart, they just pick him up and kiss him.
Yeah.
Perfectly. I want to know what.
Well, they talked about showering together in Solo, so.
There you go.
Well, oh no, they did shower together. Yeah.
They did shower together. Han could have used his lightsaber shift at that point.
Grammel comes in and he begs to know who they are. Asada didn't, even though Asada told him they're important, he didn't tell him who they actually were, so he wants to know. And he tells him that the Imperial Governor is coming. And when Leia hears this, she realizes it must be because they recognized her. So she starts to have flashbacks to when she was tortured on the Death Star, and she passes out. And Grammel gets frustrated because they're not talking, and he just leaves. But I do like that they acknowledge that Leia was tortured, because it is one aspect of the movie that feels off. She's this really strong character, but she was tortured and her world was just blown up, and she seems to act like nothing happened. So I kind of like that this acknowledges there were consequences there.
It's either that or finally the slap to the head just caught up to her.
That could be too. After Grandma leaves, Hala comes to their cell window, and she says she'll help them escape. The control mechanism, it seems to be like a sensor. You just have to cover with your hand or something, and that'll open the door. So she starts to use the Force with a lot of effort to move one of their food trays out of the cell to try and cover up the sensor, but she's visibly struggling, and she tells Luke that she needs help. Luke feels like he can't help her, but he does try. And as he does so, he hears Obi-Wan's voice telling him to relax. And I think the exact quote is, "Don't try to force the Force." And it works, and together they're able to move the food tray to cover the sensor, and it opens the door. As they escape, they use them, grab weapons from some stormtroopers, and they just cause a whole bunch of destruction. They're just demolishing everything in their wake, killing everything they can find. There's just a brief scene of that.
Jesus. And Luke's the good guy in this story?
Well,
he's like destroying everything. He's hitting women.
He even admitted he was a criminal.
He's trying to get into bed with this girl that, he barely met. I don't know.
Who's his sister? But
yeah.
It's a close bond.
One of the Yuzum is able to also find Luke's lightsaber and gives it back to him. And they get to the exit doors of the jail, but there are all these guards. And before Luke and Leia can come up with a plan, the Yuzum charge in, and Hin picks up one stormtrooper and begins just ripping him apart to pieces in his arms. The other one... What?
Good guys, everyone.
And then Ki picks up a whole just desk and just smashes it on these other troopers. Leia's trying to open the door, but it's locked. And Luke finds some grenades, so he just uses one of those to blow open the door, and he throws the other one behind them to the stormtroopers rushing in.
So basically, Luke has thermal detonators, grenades, whatever you want to call them. He just throws it in front of a door and behind him to some innocent stormtroopers, blows up, and supposedly just comes out saying, like, "Psh, so uncivilized." Good guys, everyone.
This will slow him down.
Well, the grenade, it ended up catching Grammel and part of the explosion. So the next chapter has him with a doctor who's repairing his arm and face. And it's described that the doctor is able to repair his arm bone, like marrow and nerves. And I feel like if this book had come out after Empire, he probably would have just gotten a mechanical arm. But here at this early stage, she's actually like repairing him. And the doctor is probably my favorite character in the book, and she's only in it for 4.5 pages. We never even learn her name, but she's described as being old with not much drive left in life after losing someone close to her years earlier. And after she heals Grammel, he tells her that he's going to reward her for her good work. And she says for a reward, she wants the 6 guards that were assigned to guard the prisoners to be spared execution. And Grandma's like, well, they need to be punished for letting these prisoners escape. And she tells him, well, they've already been punished enough. With the injuries they sustained, I can't even fix some of them. And for those that are still able to fight, you're going to need them for whatever search you're going to conduct. And Grandma basically just says that he can't disagree with her math, so he decides to spare them. And when he leaves, the doctor just thinks to herself that her task is to save lives, and anytime she can do that when Grandma is involved is a victory. And that's it. Which I kind of wish we saw more of her character. I like that.
Hooray to heroic Dr. No Name.
Dr. No Name.
That should have been her reward. Oh, can you name me?
Put it in Wikipedia.
Dr. Shiva.
Dr. No Name.
Dr. Shiva. I'm calling her Dr. Shiva. Shiva! We need some medical attention. Some crazy kid just blew up half the freaking hallway.
And it's 2 elves.
It's his 2 elves.
Then they meet up with Hala, C-3PO, and R2-D2 at this maintenance yard, and they steal a land crawler, which is kind of like this big vehicle with wheels. And Hala has a map to the temple of Pomojema, which was drawn by a native, and she says it should take them about a week to get there. But she warns them there's going to be a lot of danger from the terrain, the wildlife, and natives, saying that much of Mimban is unexplored. Luke and the gang, they've been driving for days at this point, and they start to feel these quakes, and suddenly the ground rises in front of them and turns back to look at them, and it turns out they were driving on the back of this huge worm-like creature called a Wandrella. And as they drive away from it, the crawler gets stuck, so everyone has to jump off and basically run away to it on foot as the Wandrella grabs the vehicle.
I thought the elves were going to push.
And then here's what the Wandrella looks like.
Oh, so it's kind of like based, almost, not really, but like the worm from episode 5.
Kind of looks like sand with eyes, like bug eyes.
Well, actually, to Johnny's point, I wonder if this is another thing George Lucas took away, because it is kind of similar to the space slug, like unknowingly going into
I like
a monster.
That. Just gonna take that from my own story.
Luke and Leia, they run in a different direction from everyone else, and the worm follows them. And to escape, they climb down a cliff's ledge, or a cliff's edge to this ledge below, and they're clinging to the edge of this cliff. And the worm looks over it, it can see them, and it tries to go down to get to them, but it overexerts itself, and it just keeps sliding, and it just falls off the cliff completely.
Can you fly, you sucker?
How convenient.
Tremors reference.
So here was the worm attacking the car.
Oh,
And here it is when it falls off the cliff.
Definitely grab White.
Now, when I was reading this, the first thing that popped into my head was the Alaskan bullworm from SpongeBob. Because it's the exact same thing.
Kind of did.
That's
Probably going to fall down and say the same thing.
Ouch. Leia is also kind of really, again, shown as a damsel in distress here. She doesn't know where to go or what to do. Luke is taking charge the entire time. She's constantly afraid or quivering in fear. She's like tripping.
Because if Luke's one step out of line and Luke's confident hand is going to freaking remind her who's boss.
I feel like Luke wrote this story. Like Leia is not smart at all in this book or something. Oh my god.
Yeah, like he wrote himself to be the hero. Afterwards she read it, she was like, what?
By the way, I'm a Jedi.
That's probably why they didn't talk to each other for a second in the beginning of the fifth movie. I feel like they're staring at each other. They weren't talking. Like, because all the stuff that happened during this book.
Because of the book you just published.
Just in the middle of episode 5, like, do you remember that big worm that chases off the cliff and we definitely outsmarted it? That was some hard times, man.
I remember when you slapped me, Luke.
I remember when you killed those
when you
innocent
slapped me.
stormtroopers with grenades, just screaming maniacally, so uncivilized.
And I mean, Leia was a damsel in distress in the original movie, but there's also scenes where she grabbed the blaster and she like made the plan to escape into the garbage pit. Like she took charge. She wasn't just always.
Yeah, she was a badass. Now it's like it's not even Leia at this point.
She's just kind of
Definitely, I would say
frail and
probably the
stupid.
torture thing kind of like messed with her mind. So I will give her that. She probably just not herself after still fresh in her mind being tortured.
Maybe. Hala finds them, and Luke and Leia they're unable to climb back up to her because the Wandrella had destroyed the cliff basically when it fell over. But they do describe that they're kind of on a crevice that leads into this little passage, and Hala believes that that's a passage that was created by one of the races of Mimban that's called a Kowei, if I'm pronouncing that right. She says if they follow it, it should lead back up to the surface in a couple days and they can meet up then. So Luke and Leia start exploring this underground passage. They come upon this room of these like phosphorescent growths and all these multicolored stalactites. There's all these glowing plants. And when Leia bumps into one, they discover it makes sounds. And so then Luke and Leia are kind of described as being like children. They're just running around, rapping everything they can touch, just making all this like sounds and music. And they're just kind of having fun.
1981.
Leia's explaining how beautiful everything in the passage is when she basically walks off a cliff that she didn't see and just starts to fall. And Luke is able to grab her just in the last moment and pull her back up. And my notes on this section literally just read sigh. I was pretty tired at this point of her needing to be rescued. They come to this underground lake, and to cross it, Luke decides to use these big lily pads that are floating kind of as a makeshift raft. So and they grab these long crystals to use as oars. And Luke uses his lightsaber underwater to cut the lily pad free, which is maybe the first instance of seeing a lightsaber underwater, which is cool. They rest for a bit, and then they decide to head out across the lake. And they're rowing for about half a day when they get attacked by this huge, like, amoeba-like creature. It's just kind of like this blob with limbs that stretch out everywhere from it. And Luke's just swinging at it with his lightsaber, but it just kind of seems to make it pull back. It doesn't seem to actually hurt the creature whenever he touches it. But Luke just keeps swinging at it, and eventually it just seems to give up and it just goes away. And apparently, at least according to Wikipedia, this is called a Mimban Lake Spirit. And here's the cover of the comic with one of it, which I think looks much cooler than what actually happens in the comic, because this is the actual, like, where it actually happens in the comic. So doesn't seem to have much significance. Luke doesn't even really fight it off. It just kind of shows up and then decides to leave.
He didn't do anything. Luke's a monster in this comic. This book.
They get to the end of the underground lake, and they come to this seemingly abandoned city. And Luke steps into the lake, and the water goes about up to his waist. And he tells Leia that they can walk to shore, but she says she doesn't want to step in the water. So Luke carries her across, and you would assume that she was afraid of all the freaking amoebas and creatures, but she tells Luke that she doesn't know how to swim. So Luke, who is from a desert planet, knows how to swim, but Leia, who's from Alderaan, filled with lush lakes and things, and again, needs to travel the galaxy, doesn't know how to swim. So again,
sigh.
And why didn't you reverse the roles here?
In the end, it's just going to be Luke waking up from a dream on Hoth, and this was the whole book all along.
That'd be so
It's just Luke
awesome.
dreaming.
My Luke, you're so handsome. That's how the book ends.
Han's just in the next room, like, Luke, are you done with that? Like, almost done.
They start exploring the abandoned city, and it appears to have been made by an advanced race that no longer exists. And they suddenly get attacked by a group of Koways, which was one of those indigenous races I mentioned. Luke and Leia manage to fight them off, and to give the author some credit here, Leia does fight a couple of them off herself with a piece of rock, and she even kills one and then uses the creature's axe and throws it at another and kills it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Badass Leia.
Somewhat civilized.
Again, we have Luke cuts off one of the creature's hands. So this early on, we have that
Classic
trope.
Luke Skywalker cutting off somebody's hands.
This car's gonna catch up to him.
And the Koway, just to show you what that looks like. Keep in mind the cavern is green, so I don't think they're actually green, but the image looks green.
That totally looks like Deadpool.
Mothman.
Deadpool Mothman.
But the people that Han was fighting in Solo, I don't think you ever see them on film, but I think there was production suits made, and it seems they based them off the people in this book, because that's what they looked like in the movie. So it seems like they kind of took inspiration from that.
Yeah.
Needs a little green.
Luke and Leia they chase after the surviving Koway, just so that way it can't warn its friends. But when they follow it through a cave, they come across this huge amphitheater just filled. There's like about 200 Koways in there. And Hala, the Yuzum, and the droids are shown as being captured and tied to rocks in the center. So I guess they were captured off screen. Hala is able to translate what the Koways are saying, which, as Johnny said earlier, like, why is C-3PO not doing anything? He's literally there, and he's not translating. This is like the perfect part for him to play. But she's the one doing it. And she says Luke can win their freedom if he defeats their champion in unarmed combat. And Luke agrees. There's a conversation where Leia's trying to convince Luke that he needs to fight so that way they can be free and they can attend that important rebel meeting. And Luke has a pretty out of character response where he says, he says it's more important that he goes on living than to give a patriotic sacrifice, which sounds more like something Han would say, not Luke.
Well, he already destroyed the Death Star once. Come on, I mean, like, he's already done his job. He wants to go back to farming.
He's sick of this. He's sick of having to take care of Leia this whole time.
You know, maybe Uncle Owen was right. Battling space amoebas and everything. I think he was right about. He was catching on about something.
The fight begins and Luke starts losing pretty quickly. It's clear that the co-weight champion, though about Luke's size, is much stronger. And at one point, the champion is able to hold Luke's head under some water that's there, and it basically starts drowning Luke, and he starts to lose consciousness. But then the champion just suddenly lets go, and Luke gets up, and he just sees the champion just laying on the ground. There's a rock next to his head, and blood's coming from his head. And Luke is confused on what happened, but everyone is just congratulating him for winning the fight.
Did I do that with the Force?
He did, because Luke realizes he must have unconsciously used the Force to throw the rock at the opponent's head when he was underwater.
That would be so cool.
But, I mean, he was pressed underwater, and everyone just thinks he won.
Well,
checks out.
In the audience perspective, probably they just thought that Luke was drowning and some magical rock just came out and smashed them. That's the sign of a god right there. Nah, he's not meant to win.
Just checks out, yeah.
Everyone is set free, and the Koei invite them to a group feast. We cut to the feast, and we do get some backstory on Leia. She's enjoying the entertainment. I guess the Koeis are like dancing and doing stuff. And she says art is the reason she joined the Rebel Alliance. She describes being bored growing up on Alderaan because art had been stifled by the Empire. And it's that restriction of free thought that was one of the things that led her to the rebellion. Recent sources cite her parents as an inspiration more to do good, but I don't think this explanation is unreasonable. We get another love moment between the two of them here. Luke bites into a fruit and it just gushes juice all over him. And he's like, oh, what do you expect from a farm boy? And Leia's like...
Luke, what are you doing in there?
And Leia's like, I think you're one of the most sophisticated men I know. And the music seems to fade.
Him dreaming.
The music fades, and Luke locks eyes with her, and it's described like a missile locking onto its prey.
He's seeing Leia like a Death Star. Freaking like...
The moment is broken, though, when Luke senses that Vader is nearby. And Leia actually calls him a Dark Lord of the Sith, which is interesting because the term Sith isn't used in the original movies. But I believe it is in the original script and probably the novelization. They're warned that stormtroopers are spotted approaching nearby, and they question how Vader could have found them, and Luke says he believes that he is the reason why, that Vader must have sensed him there. That's kind of similar to Return of the Jedi, but it also happened in A New Hope where he sensed that Obi-Wan was on the station.
Well, technically speaking, yeah, he did use the Force to kill that one innocent gladiator that was killing him, so, Luke probably just saw all that.
It's like a Force magnet or something, yeah.
Force magnet, Vader saw all that go down, like, holy frick.
When they say he senses Vader nearby, apparently C-3PO is described as, even though droids can't faint, he's described as doing a good impression of it when he hears it, which I just found funny. And they decide that they're going to have to fight, and they work on setting up an ambush. So they're lying in wait, and they hear the stormtroopers coming. Luke makes a comment that the close quarters they're in should render the stormtroopers' armor useless. And he says that normally their armor makes them nearly invulnerable to laser fire, which we've seen the movie. That's
like cut to every cutscene seeing a stormtrooper die.
And a scene that feels like something we would see later in the Ewoks, with the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi. The Koei just suddenly leap out of all their hiding places, surprising the troops as the battle begins. Luke and Leia rush in to engage in hand-to-hand combat, and they're firing their blasters when they can. There's a scene where Luke's lightsaber does block a blaster bolt, but it doesn't reflect back, which I think is just because it's an early example of lightsaber blocking. Because remember, in the original film, the only time we saw that was with the training remote, and it didn't reflect anything back.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they didn't know it could happen yet. Luke and Vader spot each other, and they start to make their way towards each other, lightsabers drawn. But Vader stops because he looks around and he sees that they're losing the battle. The Koeis are dropping out of hiding places to ambush troops. There's nets being dropped on stormtroopers. They blow up a couple rocks on the ceiling to crush all these troops below. Again, very Ewok feel. And the Yuzum are there too, of course, just ripping apart anything they can find. But Vader tells Grammel, who I guess is there with him too, that they need to have the troops retreat. And so as they're retreating, Leia's climbed a nearby cliff, and she takes her blaster and she aims at Darth Vader. And she pulls the trigger, and the blaster bolt does hit Vader, and it knocks him down. But he gets back up, and Leia sees that all she really did was kind of burn a hole in his side, and it's kind of superficial. And in my favorite line in the whole book, Leia, who had one of the biggest villains in her sights, a guy responsible for so much death, and she fails to kill him, and all she says is, "Well, darn."
You should have aimed for the head.
Imagine, like, someone had, like, a sniper shot at Hitler, and they missed the shot, and they were just like, "Oh, shucks.
Oh, shucks.
I missed him."
I'm just thinking it's funny when she hits him and it's like, "This is for my father."
She should have, yeah.
But I...
Actually, a similar scene happens in a semi-recent in the Marvel Star Wars line when Disney took over. There was a scene where Chewbacca also tries to snipe Darth Vader. And in that version, Darth Vader senses it coming, he reflects the blast, and then he basically just brings the whole building down on top of Chewbacca. So.
Oh, I'm not falling for that again.
We end the chapter with Luke watching as the Koways are basically killing any injured stormtroopers, or just anyone that's still alive on the ground. They're just executing them. And it's a big massacre, and Luke feels just horrified watching it, and he kind of just walks off, not feeling like there should be anything to be celebrated. But he and Leia gather with Hala to decide what to do next. And we do get a brief conversation where Leia does say she's angry that she missed the shot with Vader. She's like, "I had him in my sights," so at least she gets a better reaction here than just darn. But Luke says that he can sense that Vader is now heading directly to the temple and the crystal, and that most likely he senses power. So the group realizes they need to get there as fast as possible to stop him. So they go back to the cave entrance, and there's another crawler there that brought the Imperial troops, and they make a plan to steal it so they can get to the temple fast. And the two use them, Hin and Ki. They drop into the crawler from above, and within a couple of minutes, they just kill the entire crew. And it's described that what's left of them is just a bunch of bloody pieces, and they had to clean it out before Luke and Leia could even go inside.
So how's that armor coming in, boys?
Top of the line.
Top of the line. It's over there and over there. We then get a scene with Vader and Grammel on another transport heading to the temple. And Vader's upset with Grammel for failing the battle, and he actually tells Grammel, "Your existence befouls me," right before taking his lightsaber and just slashing him.
Oh, this day was going so good. He was getting a promotion soon.
He was, but instead he got cut in half.
Whoa, gnarly.
Somebody call Dr. Shiva.
As his body falls off, we get this kind of weird quote from Vader. He says, a weird like religious quote. He goes, "Whoever is your Lord now, it is not I," which kind of feels out of place to me, but I don't know. Han brought up hell in The Empire Strikes Back.
That's when the guy who got slashed should have been like, "Darn." Shucks.
It's revealed to take several days to drive to the temple, and Luke feels peculiar as they approach, and Leia says she doesn't feel anything, and Luke starts to say something, and she's like, I know, if I were force sensitive, I would feel it. So, I mean, there's proof right there that she wasn't intended to be a force user. But they get to the temple, and they seem to have beaten Vader there, and they go inside to find the crystal, and they find it's this big glowing red crystal, but before they can get to it, this huge creature comes out of the shadows and starts towards them. From what I could find on Wikipedia, this creature was apparently retconned to be a Hissus. I don't know if you know what that is, Johnny. You might.
Sounds familiar.
That's basically a dark side lizard. It's used to guard a lot of Sith tombs.
Yes. Was it like in like old Sith academies?
It's I think they're in Knights of the Republic too. I don't think they're in the first one. It's not stated in the book. I'm assuming some reference manual later retconned it to be a Hissus.
I was completely thinking it was a snake.
I thought it was an Indoraptor. A green Indoraptor.
It does make me wonder what the story of this temple is, because they guard Sith tombs. So why is it here? But
and the crystal is red?
True. Luke is trying to... His lightsaber doesn't seem to hurt the creature whenever he can get strikes in, so he yells at Hin and Ki to go and get their blaster rifles, because I guess they left them at the transport for some reason. And Luke eventually lures the creature under a pillar, and he's able to use his lightsaber to slash it and basically cause it to collapse and kill the creature. So almost exactly like what happened with the Rancor in Return of the Jedi. Luke himself gets pinned by a rock, and he's wondering where the Yuzum are to help get it off of him, because they're strong enough to do so. And suddenly he hears Vader's voice say, I'm afraid your slow-witted companions will not be able to help you or anyone else, Skywalker. So Vader says he killed them as they were going to the transport. And he approaches, and there's a slight continuity error where he tells Luke that he found out it was him who not only destroyed the Death Star, but shot at his fighter during the battle. No acknowledgement that it was Han who shot him out.
We're not that far in the story.
Han's like,
We don't know.
yeah, it was him. It was that guy over there.
We're still we're waiting for a call back from Harrison Ford.
I haven't read the original script either that the original novel is based off of. Maybe it is different. I'd have
I'm
to
thinking
check
about
on
it
that.
because at the end when Vader was putting Han in carbonite, he never said that too. Like, you're the one who shot at my ship.
Yeah.
No, that was Luke. Remember? He said that.
Wrong.
Vader is pretty threatening here. He tells Leia that he's going to enjoy showing her all of the things a lightsaber can do as long as she does not pass out first. And Luke is pinned, so he can't do anything. So Leia decides to fight back herself. So she grabs Luke's lightsaber and she goes to fight Vader. And in a funny line, Vader says, "Come, girl, woman, amuse me."
Girl, woman.
Girl, woman. And to her credit, Leia goes in and she goes to strike and Vader parries and then she twists and she lands a hit right to his breath mask with the lightsaber.
Darn, I missed again.
Vader does pull back in time to prevent any serious damage, and he tells her that he's been overconfident before and he won't make that mistake again. Here's
Man,
Leia
yeah,
fighting
shot, kid.
Vader.
Oh, wow.
Pretty cool, I think. They continue to duel, and Vader's being really aggressive. He's giving Leia no time to attack her. He manages to cut her across the stomach, and then he cuts her again on the cheek, again on the back of her leg. It's all non-fatal wounds, but he just keeps cutting her. Meanwhile, we see that Hin is actually still alive, but he's dying. He's crawling his way over to Luke, and he manages to get to Luke and lift the rock off of him that was pinning him. Just as he does so, he dies right after. Yeah. And just as that happens, Vader just cuts Leia again across the chest. This one seems pretty fatal. And Luke starts running towards them, and Leia throws a lightsaber to Luke. And Vader tries to catch it as it goes by, but he misses, and it lands on the floor. And then,
just like force.
well, that's the thing. It's on the floor, and they both run to get it.
What?
You're gonna see her Vader.
just like,
So obviously using the Force to pull objects to you wasn't a thing yet, but I mean, he lifted a rock earlier, so I don't know what happened
I don't know
here.
why you can
It's
just
a
pull this
lightsaber.
lightsaber.
It just wasn't in his mind. But I do like the idea in my head of just watching both of them running to this thing on the ground to see who can get it first. But Luke gets to it first, and with the saber in hand, Luke tells Vader, he says, "I am Ben Kenobi." And Vader takes pause at that, telling Luke that he killed Ben. And Luke then says that the Force and Ben Kenobi is with him, and they begin their duel. Vader starts using the Force to throw a rock at Luke, and Luke is able to use the Force to throw another rock to intercept it. They start to get more into a fight, and Vader keeps using the Force to throw objects, and Luke is able to deflect them all. And he's able to hold his own against Vader, to the point where both of them have to take a break, and they're just sitting there just panting from exhaustion.
Take a break, hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back at it.
Something I think is interesting here is that it's implied that Obi-Wan is somehow helping Luke in this fight, like maybe even possessing him a little bit. It's not totally clear, but if that would explain why Luke is able to hold his own against Vader at this point, and he wasn't able to do so later in Return of the Jedi or in Empire Strikes Back.
I failed you, Anakin. What?
And if that's also what's going on, it adds some interesting context to Luke and Obi-Wan's conversation in Empire Strikes Back. Because if you remember, when Luke goes to leave, Obi-Wan tells him, he's like, if you choose to confront Vader, you're going to do it alone. I will not help you. Which you could say implies that Obi-Wan's like, I'm not going to help you this time if you're going to go off and make a stupid decision yourself.
No hacks mode this time.
No wonder
Yeah.
he wasn't here through most of the book already.
Again, also, it makes me wonder if George Lucas pulled this scene for Empire Strikes Back with Vader just throwing objects with the Force at Luke constantly. But anyways, Vader starts to levitate off the ground, and he's spinning his lightsaber around him super fast. It's described as a blue blur, so I guess Vader's lightsaber is incorrectly described as being blue here. And when Vader's spinning lightsaber around, he suddenly throws it at Luke, and he's able to knock Luke's lightsaber out of his own hand. Then Vader grabs his wrist and he starts making a retching movement. So I guess he's like going like this.
Come to me.
And he materializes a glowing energy ball that he then shoots at Luke. I guess like Dragon Ball style.
I was gonna say that. Like, what's with this Dragon Ball stuff now?
But Luke holds out his hand and he catches the ball and then he kind of reflects it back to Vader, and the Force just kind of explodes and sends them both to the ground.
That was the closest to getting a father and son playing catch together, right there. With the green energy ball. Your son, your dad.
The power is called Kinetite, I guess, and in the comic adaptation, which I have here, it's kind of looks like a glowing ball, like a ball of lightning almost. And when fans talk about it, it makes them think that Vader's using Force lightning here, but it's called Kinetite. And it's really described more like Force push, because it makes just a pushing when it explodes. Yeah. Why we don't see this more often? Apparently, in some reference or other guide, it was described that this may be because of his close proximity to the Kyber crystal, why he's able to do this.
I just thought that he forgot how to use it.
Maybe.
I just thought the trailer was gonna be like, we could do that.
It could also, I think it's also suggested in other materials that maybe he has something literally built into his suit. Like maybe it's not even a Force power at all. But
Go get your energy ball.
Luke clashes with Vader again, and he manages to cut off Darth Vader's arm. So when Vader does this to Luke in Empire Strikes Back, you could argue that's a little bit of revenge for what happened here. After that blow, Luke is too exhausted to get up, but Vader is still able to get up no problem, and he picks up his lightsaber and he starts to head over. And Luke is just, at this point, he's waiting for the finishing blow. But as he's expecting it, he also says the official confession. He says to himself, "I'm sorry, Leia, I loved you." What happens next is confusing. Vader suddenly goes flying over his head and he stumbles back and he just falls down a hole, this deep hole.
Whoa!
I reread it a couple of times, and they don't explain at all what happened. But when the comic decided to adapt this scene, they were brilliant, and this whole page is really well drawn. But Vader tripped over his own severed arm.
Oh my god!
So I think that's hilarious. He just fell over his own arm.
So basically, Luke is gonna look over the hole and look at the severed hand that basically saved his life and throw it into the hole with Vader and take your freaking hand with you.
Luke can sense that Vader's still alive, but he's otherwise disposed for the moment. And Hala comes down. She has the crystal, and she tells Luke that she's a fake and she's not really strong in the Force, and she wouldn't be able to do much with the crystal. And she gives it to Luke. And Luke crawls over to Leia, who appears to either have died or she's like really close to death.
Of course.
As he holds it, the crystal starts to glow and energy starts to go into Luke. And then he starts to just kind of trace Leia's wounds with his fingers. And everywhere he touches, her wounds heal. The crystal fades and Leia wakes up saying that she's nothing more than just a headache. Here's a scene of him healing her. And Hala does bring up that the crystal was known in legend for its healing properties.
Well, don't tell Rey that, you know.
I know.
Or don't tell Anakin.
I mean, second,
Or
Dr. Shiva.
Dr. Shiva's crystal.
Luke, Leia, and Hala, they head out towards the crawler and they reactivate the droids. C-3PO comments that Vader knew the codes to shut them down, which, I don't know, maybe you could take some context from that the Vader recognized him or not. Luke and Leia say they can now head to that meeting on Sir Carpus 4, and they invite Hala to join them. Hala says she's not sure about joining the rebellion, but she will go with them, and they head out together. And that's the end of the book. Very abrupt ending. We never see the meeting they're supposed to get to. Did they make it in time? They spent like weeks getting to this place. Is it even over? What happens to the Kyber crystal that they just have? This amazing Force amplifying ability.
Well, of course, it healed Leia and also gave the powers. That's why she became Force sensitive.
Sold it on space eBay.
Maybe.
And Hala was just probably at the end like, I'm too old for this.
I do have a book, the new Essential Chronology. It's kind of an old Star Wars history book. I used to show you guys in high school what that looked like. But in that book, they say that apparently the crystal's power was tied to the temple. So when they took it away, it lost all its power. It became like a trinket, essentially.
It almost came like the Holy Grail from Indiana Jones, almost. You know,
Well, you can't use it out
you
here.
can't break the seal. You can't go past a certain point, otherwise it'll.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
So
It's been a while since I saw that one.
So if you want full res, you got to be inside the building.
You gotta be at the temple. It is said, apparently, I guess Luke experiments with using it as a lightsaber crystal years later and finds that it makes a very strong blade. But that's the end of the book, so what do you guys think?
I give it 4 backhands to the face out of 5.
I thought it was compelling. In the beginning. In the beginning, I'm like thinking, oh my god, Luke is a misogynist?
Misogynist, freaking horn dog.
Horn dog. He couldn't get what he wants, so he got as a slave. But no, I mean, I like the fact that Luke got he didn't get like revenge yet, but he was the one who struck first and got Darth Vader's hand and got his dad's hand cut off first.
And was so tactically genius that he placed his hand perfectly in the floor where it was going to trip Vader, where he didn't even see it coming. Whoops!
Like a banana peel or something.
He's like Sherlock, like thinking like all these moves ahead.
Now I can't stop thinking of Vader and Luke running for that lightsaber. That's what's really like getting me.
It would be an easy thing to get cosplayers to do, I'm sure.
Yeah.
On my part, I think it's interesting just to get a glimpse at early Star Wars history, as well as what could have been the second film in another reality. This could have been what we got. And it's a quick read, which is nice, and the duel with Darth Vader in the end is fun. But other than that, I don't care for this book too much, and I think it's mainly due to 2 things that I can't really say is the author's fault. The first is the characterizations. Everyone feels a little bit off. Like we talked about, Leia's really bratty. She's constantly needs to be rescued. Like stuff like that I don't like. Luke can swim and speak languages of other people. It's just it just doesn't feel right.
Super heroic and
Killing stormtroopers, swamp creatures, trying to kill a Mew that was minding its own business.
Yeah. Again, the movie wasn't even out yet when this was finished. I don't know. I don't know how much I can ding the author for that. He had a script. He didn't even see it, and this is what he had to go off of. So
it would definitely been a way different like story if that one was like the 5th movie or something.
I'd be interested to see if Disney ever approached him and wanted him to like kind of remake it. I'd be interested to see what changes he would make to that. Again, no restrictions.
George Lucas saw this book and was like, I like the worm. Take that from
I like the worm scene.
I like the rocks.
I was like, yeah, but using the Force to heal wounds.
We'll save that for later.
That's too much.
That'll never happen. That'll never happen. Disney. Well, actually.
The second reason I didn't care for this book much is because this isn't the author's fault. This is the first expanded universe novel, and there are now so many more options. Much more. There's better books out there that I think are truer to the characters. Ones that I would even like to include when doing movie marathons. They just feel super important. I don't see myself ever wanting to like go back to this one to reread. But again, that's not the author's fault. He was just the first. I would say I recommend this book to anyone that's interested in Star Wars history, and by history I mean the history of the film, not lore, because it is an important part of that early film process. But for everyone else, there's just better options out there. But in closing, that is it. So I want to thank everyone for joining us for the first episode of the Rogue Reader podcast. Next time, we're going to jump into the first book of the Young Jedi Knight series, Heirs of the Force, as we follow Han and Leia's kids, Jason and Jaina Solo, while training at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy. Have a good day, everyone, and may the Force be with you. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Rogue Reader podcast. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe for more content, and share to any other Star Wars fans you think might also enjoy this content. Thank you very much.